Good morning to all, and welcome back to Booth Library for the continuation of the Symposium on Ancient Greece. It's been quite the voyage these past 5 weeks, and today is the last day of the symposium, which is quite exciting for us because we're looking at both the arts and the sciences this morning, which is an appropriate closing to this. And then tonight we will have the finale at 6 o'clock in the North Gym of McAfee, and we will have music.
We'll be
Dr.
there.
Corey Francis will be conducting, and we will have dance, and we will have athletic demonstrations and a presentation on the Olympics. So I hope you'll join us there. To introduce our speaker, I will ask Dr. Wabi to do so.
Thank you for coming to this session, which comes at the last end, the very last day of the symposium, the futuristic look through ancient lenses. And we are so grateful that things went very well and people are so happy with what we did, so that many of them say, when would be the next one? What topic are you going to cover? So we are considering which other ancient civilization for next year, so stay tuned. It's my pleasure today to introduce an artist, scientist, and researcher, scholar, doctor, quote unquote, Corey Francis. He was scheduled to give his doctorate and receive it to give his defense on the 10th of October. And for family reasons, he had to postpone it. But we'll call you doctor. How about that?
Good enough. I'll take that promotion.
Let the music ring and let it start, never end.
Thank you very much. I have a great big voice because I have to deal with the marching band all the time, so I don't need a microphone. Thank you for that. My name is Corey Francis. I'm finishing up my doctorate degree at University of Southern Mississippi, where I focus on actually ensemble conducting. So I'm not necessarily a music historian, but I've had to spend so much time in music history and so much time in scores of music that I know a lot about the structures and the foundations and all that stuff. And so what I'm going to present to you today is a discussion on how the culture of ancient Greek, whether it was drama, architecture, and these ideas of the ancient Greeks influenced the music that you know from Bach, from the time of Bach, from the time of Mozart, and these composers and during those time periods, because it's very heavily influential into what these composers did. Now, I'm a band director, so most stuff I deal with is band, but I do have a great experience in orchestra as well. So we're going to dive into orchestral scores and opera scores today and talk about how this ancient Greek culture influenced music. Now, before we get started, we need to talk about the difference in these ages. Ancient Greek music was actually evidenced around, well, that's great grammar at the very first sentence, huh? Ancient Greek music is evidenced, that's first evidence, should be around 800 BC and was part of daily culture. They would use it for dramas, they would use it for civil events, they would use it for church, whatever was going on, they would have some sort of musical styles go along with it, whether it was a wind instrument, kind of like a flute called an alos, or string instruments, lyres, things like that, were greatly a part of their culture. Fast forward 2,400 years, you get to the Baroque era, where music was performed mostly in church and in court functions. But many of the composers during this time composers and musicians were actually employees of church or the nobility. The classical era changes things up. After Bach dies in 1750, we get the start of the classical era, and this is where musicians started to be more independent. They start to do things on their own and work with patrons as opposed to necessarily a church or a certain noble person. And then we also have the rise of amateur musicians as noted during this era of music. So we're talking of a span of 2,400 years between ancient Greek music being evidenced, the Baroque era beginning, and then the classical era another 150 years later. So over 2,500 years of history, but the influences are great. During the Baroque era, you have a turbulent change in politics, in arts, and sciences. We're going from thinking the world is flat to the world is round. We're talking about the sun going around, the earth going around the sun, not the sun going around the earth, and lots of religious wars, a lot of things that are going on during this time. Music making being centered around the home, the church, and in universities, specifically the church. Bach himself worked for the Lutheran Church for almost his entire career and had over 600 church cantatas that he wrote specifically for the Lutheran Church. The biggest part of the Baroque spirit that is taken from Greek drama in particular is this idea of the doctrine of affections. This is an idea that was labeled to it after the Baroque era, but was definitely something that was in effect during the time. During Greek drama, there was this idea of trying to stir the passions, trying to change the emotions of people or influence them, whether it be political, whether it be something in music, to give them the idea of love, the idea of hate, sorrow, whatever was going on. They wanted to grab the audience and help them stir their emotions up. And that's where we get this idea of the doctrine of affections for the Baroque era. During this time, the composers would do things within their music to stir up the fluids within the body, whether it was blood, whether it was bile, whatever it was. There's about 6 different emotions they would try to go through. Love and hate, joy and sorrow or melancholy, wonder and desire. And they would have this idea of trying to present one of these emotions or affections during a movement of a work. So when we get to the Baroque era, we start operas. We're going to get into an opera here in just a minute. But we start to see multiple movement works, and each movement has a different effect. One of the ones we're going to deal with today is mostly the hate and the sorrow side of things. But the idea of using, in ancient Greek, they used rhetorical devices, whether it was alliteration or other rhetorical devices to kind of persuade people. Here we're going to get the repetition of music. We're going to get what's called a psi motive. We're going to get a ground bass or ostinatos, things like this, or word painting in the Baroque music, which is derived specifically from the ancient Greeks. Monody is the style of music that really became influential during the Baroque era, and this comes specifically from the ancient Greeks, where you have a solo singer reciting something with an accompanied instrument, whether it's a lyre, a harpsichord, some other instrument, but you have a solo person singing, reciting something with a musical background. In Homer's Odyssey or the other epic poems during this time, you see a lot of that, where someone is holding a lyre and speaking, or there's some sort of music going on while someone's reciting something. And this is directly, this idea of monody, the solo song with instrumental accompaniment, comes from the Baroque era and is derived from the Greeks. The Florentine Camerata was the treatise that brought this together, or the group of people that created the treatise that brought this together. Most of these were nobility, Galilei, Caccini, and Peri. Caccini was actually a composer. He was the only composer on the Florentine Camerata, which kind of helped everything develop within the Baroque era. There was a very important treatise and convention on what was going to happen in the 1600s musically. We just get out of the Renaissance era where things are layered on top of each other. You can't understand things. These guys look back to the ancient Greeks, and particularly their drama and their solo singing. We're going to listen to a couple examples here coming from Dido's, actually it's Henry Purcell's opera, Dido and Aeneas, and we're going to deal with Act 3. The first example we're going to hear is Dido's Lament. We're going to hear the recitative by Thy Hand Belinda, and in this you're going to see what's known as some of the things that they use as rhetorical devices. One thing they tried, or not the rhetorical devices, but how to affect the emotions. One idea is this idea of chromaticism. If you look here at the very beginning of the piece of music, you see what we call the key signature, and it says that we have 2 flats within our key. We lower 2 notes a half step. If you don't know a lot about music, it's simply just a symbol saying whatever note's on this line is going to be played flat or played down a little bit. Well, this symbol here raises it up a half step, which is going to cause a lot of tension within the music. This is going to help to bring about the darkness, the more tense emotions throughout the piece. We also have here this little fall, which you see here and here as well. We're going to call this a psi motive. It's just kind of this little, I'm in such sorrow that I'm just kind of, oh, woe is me. And you're going to hear a lot of that throughout this piece. This is the recitative by Thy Hand Belinda. It's a solo singer with accompaniment. Now, the accompaniment doesn't do much. There's not a lot of rhythmic drive. It's just kind of someone reciting and strumming along on various times. Let's give a little bit of a listen to this. Listen particularly for the psi motive that you're going to hear a couple of measures in. little bit of a, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Where did it go? There, sorry about that. But it's obvious you hear that little sine motive. It gives a little bit of darkness, a little bit of tension to the music. You hear the accompaniment not very active at all. So it's just someone reciting and kind of strumming along. Okay, so those are very obvious devices that they'll use to increase the tension and kind of stir the passions up a little bit. Another one, which comes in the song that directly after this recitative, is When I Am Laid in Earth, which is an aria. Aria pretty much is a solo song with a more active accompaniment. You're going to hear more rhythmic drive, you're going to hear more things within the accompanimental figures. And here we're going to have this idea of rhetorical device, alliteration, or what we're going to call the ostinato. This passage of music that is being repeated here, and it goes throughout the entire piece. I think it goes about five or six times throughout the aria. You're going to hear this little phrase of music be repeated. So it's kind of an alliteration, kind of a repetition of syllable, kind of just an idea of repeating in general. Another thing with this, though, is word painting, which is very crucial. When I am laid in earth means when you're buried, right? Well, when you have the idea, you're going to talk to someone about when I am buried in the earth, you're going to sing about it. Are you going to sing something that goes from a lower note to a higher note? Probably not, because you want to give the image of being laid down. So it goes lower and lower and lower to get the idea that you're going 6 feet under. Okay? So this is another idea taken from the Greek. So this word painting tried to paint the picture with the words. And here we're doing it with the pitch. The idea of the music mirroring what's being sung is crucial during the Baroque era. So you'll hear this a few times. You hear that it's descending all the way through, giving the idea of the word painting being laid down into the ground. And it repeats. Word painting here as well. So you can hear that ostinato going through, alliteration or repetition of the phrase. Again, the sine motive, also kind of word painting being laid, going from a higher pitch to a lower pitch. Same thing here, more word painting. So these ideas were very, very big within the operas, within the music period of the Baroque era. And this is just a very, very, very small example, but you can go through works of Monteverdi, works of Bach, and see these type of things within there. What's a little bit more obvious to us, there's another style of music I forgot to talk about. I need to talk about real quick that's important to the Baroque era. And that's the idea of the courtly dances, these suites. If you went to a party at the nobility's house during the time of the Baroque era, you're going to hear this style of music played all the way through. This is called the Baroque suite, the dance suite. And usually it consists of 5 movements: the allemande, the courante, sarabande, some sort of optional dance, whether it's a minuet, gavotte, bourrée, whatever, and then close up with a jig. Each one of these had some sort of emotion attached to it, some sort of mood that the composer would try to bring about throughout the work. In the Allemande, they wanted some sort of contentment, something a little bit more upbeat. The Courante, hopefulness. Sarabande, ambition. Each of these had a time signature, a key signature, something musically that was going to be associated with this. Most of these were either in 2 beats a measure or 3 beats a measure, and that really affects the whole mood. The Courante being a 3, in 3, the Sarabande being in 2, the jig being in 6 sometimes. But each one of these has an emotion tied to it, and what the composer would do was try to mimic that within the work. The most common of the optional dances was the minuet. You hear that a lot, and actually became part of the classical era as well, this idea of the minuet, a cheerful movement within the middle of a work. So not only was it opera, but this is more of an instrumental ensemble that would play at dance parties, background music for courtly events, whether it's a birthday party of a princess or just having fun on a 4th of July if they celebrated that, which I know they probably didn't. But that's the idea with those. The classical era brings us the use of architecture, the idea of order, objectivity, and proportion. Over here we have the Parthenon in Athens. If you look at the Parthenon and you know the structure of the Parthenon, it's very ordered, very balanced. Well, how do you get that? Well, let's see. If you look at the columns of the front, you have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns that fills the front, if you go left to right. If you go from front to back, if I still remember this, I believe it's 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, hard to see, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. If I did my counting right. That's pretty ordered, isn't it? By 4s or by 8s. 8 in the front, 16 in the back. That's pretty balanced. Okay? Not necessarily completely symmetrical, but if you doubled it up, it would be fine. So there's a lot of order, there's a lot of proportion within this music. And that was a big thing that the classical composers of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven took from the ancient Greek cultures. During this time, we're talking 1750 to about 1820, about that. It's still not defined within music history exactly where this era ends. But you have the American Revolution happening, the French Revolution happening, more advances in sciences, the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Reason. So there seems to be more of this idea of science and kind of ordering and structuring things, and there being this going through all of culture, and music was just part of it. We go from the Baroque era, which was more centered around Germany, Leipzig, Bonn, Berlin, where Bach spent a lot of his career, to Vienna, Austria. Austria becomes a very important player in the music history. We have the first Viennese school of composers. All of these composers were studied in Vienna and spent a lot of time. Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and Franz Schubert. So a very centralized area. We're talking from Greece to Vienna here. This is where the central idea of the classical era comes about. In the classical era, elements of classical style. We have singable lyric melodies, something that's very memorable. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, classical era. Ode to Joy, classical era. Things that you know, those songs have a background here. Rhythms and meters are very regular. So you're going to have this idea of order within meter and structure. Simple textures. A lot of different composers. There's some good examples of their pieces right here. Again, if you saw the Parthenon a few minutes ago, you're having the similar column structure up in the very front. Again, very proportionate, 6 in the front, very balanced. Well, what this created was the idea of classical forms, how to structure the music. There wasn't a lot of structure done in the Baroque era. There was some things, there was some structure, but really the big thing about the classical era was its idea of balance, its idea of structure. The idea of the theme came about, where this musical idea is transferred throughout the piece of music. It becomes a central idea within the piece of music. It's not through compose like you see now, or you actually saw in the Baroque era. It's you have this theme, and it's going to come back. You're going to hear it quite a bit. This is Eine kleine Nachtmusik from Mozart. You should be familiar with this piece, at least I hope you are. 2 bars, 2 more bars. Very balanced, right? You have this idea kind of going back and forth, and a nice closing to that. This brings about, this piece of music is actually what we call in the sonata allegro form, or just plain old sonata form. Okay? And the idea of balance you can see here. You have an exposition, you have a development, and you have a recapitulation. You see the labels above those, the letters. Music structure, we usually tend to go by a letter A, B, C, or whatever. So wherever you see the A, it means that idea is being repeated. Well, here you've got an A section, all the contents of that A section. Sometimes it's repeated, sometimes not all the time. The B section, something different, the development section. And then you have the recapitulation, which is the same idea as the A section. Now, if you look at this, you see this has kind of got a little line here and there's nothing over there. What's going to happen is this. We're going to take the original theme. We're going to state it. Then we're going to have some sort of transition, something that's going to take us to a different area, a different key. And we're going to have another theme. But still, it's probably going to be very similar to what you heard before in the ideas of 2 bars plus 2 bars, creating a theme, and going through and expanding on it a little bit. And we're going to bring it to a nice close, a nice little package, bring it all up. It's going to be a nice a little settling moment before we get to the development section. The development section in sonata form means anything can go. Anything can happen. You can do whatever you want to. They're going to, in this piece, Mozart's going to take this theme you hear right here and throw it through a whole bunch of different keys. Just that small fragment of that first 2 bars that we saw a minute ago. He's going to take this phrase right here and throw it around a whole bunch of different key areas and really kind of build tension that way. It can go to any key and go anywhere it wants to, as long as when we get back here, theme 1 stayed at the same level, the same key. If it's in the key of E flat, then it's going to be an E flat over here. If it's in the key of B flat over here. If it's in the key of F sharp, same thing. We get back to the recapitulation. We state everything that we saw over here, except there's no change of keys. Theme 2 winds up being in the same key as theme 1, and it closes off into a nice little package. Let's listen to this real quick. It only takes a couple moments, so you can hear everything that's going on. Theme 1. Now little fragments of it, kind of. Now we're getting to the bridge. It's going to take us to a different key. Tension's building, but we still have that idea of kind of every 2 bars, every 4 bars, there's this idea of order and structure. Theme 2, something completely different, but still a 2 bar. Repeat it. Very balanced, right? Very structured. Closing it up a little bit. And it's going to repeat. Okay, we'll miss the repeat. We'll go right to the development section. Oh no, boo hiss. That's not what I wanted you to do. Opening fragment. Now we're taking theme 2 fragment. Different key, right? So still using the structures, the fundamental structures of these themes and doing different things with it. And it goes on for a few moments. Oh, that's not what I wanted. But we go back to the beginning with it. exact same music from before, right? Again, order, structure. But this time, it doesn't change keys. We get to the last theme. Same music as before, but now it's in a different key. It's in the original key. They always wanted to close things up in whatever the original key was. They didn't want to have any of this extra tension built. They want it to be nice and ordered and structured and simple, so it closes up in the original key. So that's just one of the forms. And actually, this form was probably used in 90% of the sonatas, and in, like, if it was a solo piece, a solo sonata, or a symphony, or any other style of music in that time period, you're going to hear this structure. Concertos, chamber music, this is a very important form. Let's move on. There are other forms that became very, very important during this time. The sonata form, the sonata allegro form, was used mostly the first movement of a symphony or a chamber work or whatever. The other movements could be different things. A ternary form where you have an ABA. These didn't have to necessarily line up and be exact, like, and this doesn't have to use the themes from the other sections. In the sonata form, we saw that the development section used theme 1, parts of theme 1 and theme 2, and threw it around. The difference between the ternary form and the sonata form is that this could be its own theme and not be a true development section. It doesn't have to use the music from other parts of the piece. You saw that in the development section of the sonata form. It did. We could use a shortened sonata form where it's a little bit more abbreviated without repeats. Maybe even omit the second theme and the recapitulation. We'll talk about the theme and variations in just a second. A rondo form, which is simply A, B, A, C, A, B, A. It's just a repetition of each one of those, each little pattern, each little section. The theme and variations, you can see it's also very ordered and structured. You're going to come up with a theme, and it's going to be a simple theme for A theme, and then it's repeated, and then another theme for a B theme. So Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, for some reason, if you want to go off that one. Throw that in there for your A theme. Well, what would happen is the next section, you state the theme first, obviously, and in that variation, you would do something different. You would change the melody up a little bit. Instead of making it simple quarter notes, maybe you'd make it eighth notes, or you do something else rhythmically, or you do something melodically with it. You change the harmony. Instead of being in major, maybe it's in minor this time around. So you do something with the harmonic variation. Rhythmic variation, you change the rhythmic or drive of the piece. You could do lots of other things with the dynamics, textures, maybe it's in one voice, maybe it's in 5 voices the next time. Do a lot of other things. But notice, it's always A and B, A and B, A and B, etc., all the way through. So again, the idea of order, the idea of structure plays an important part in the formal structures. Then we have what we saw the minuet earlier within the Baroque era. Now it becomes a movement within the classical era. And they would take that little dance and put it here. And this is very similar to what you would see with the minuet in the Baroque era. It would be a little bit of a theme, and then it repeats, and then a different theme, and it repeats. And it would be a 3/4, something very light and easy to dance to. But then they would take, what the classical era did was take that minuet, put a different dance in the middle of it, and then repeat it again, this time without each section repeating on its own. If you haven't noticed, I should say this before, this little symbol here in music means repeat that whole section. So I should have said that a little earlier. But again, idea of structure and balance. Maybe this is 16 bars long. This is probably 16 bars long. This could be 8. That could be 8. That could be 32, whatever. And then you have your other structure going on later. You have the repetition of the A and B section again. So again, structure, balance, order. The forms that came from the classical era were derived from that order and balance of the architecture from the Parthenon and other structures during ancient Greek. So, there's over the last to kind of conclude things up, over the last probably 15 years, there's been more written about ancient Greek music than there was probably the 50 years before that. There's more text coming out. Still, not a lot is known. We know about we know that they had instruments. We don't know what necessarily all the instruments were. We don't necessarily know how they were notated or played, but we know they had instruments, when they used instruments, why they used instruments as a part of everyday life. They had modes. There's ideas of rhythm and melody, which have developed over time. The scales and keys that you hear now were actually taken from ancient Greek and then into the church modes of Gregorian chant, and then have developed over time. Matter of fact, there's one called the Dorian mode, which is a scale that, it's a different type of scale that we use now, mainly in jazz playing. You'll hear a lot of that. So we still use the scales and modes that they had back then, and they also had the start of our music theory. Many of the terms that we use now are derived from that. Music itself is derived from ancient Greek. Symphony, orchestra, organ, baritone. All of these words are actually derived from ancient Greek. The Greek idea of drama, Greek drama and the idea of stirring the passions in the listeners was a key thing during the Baroque era, and we saw that with the use of rhetorical devices, whether it was alliteration or repetition, things like that. Also with the psi motive, trying to, or other little motives to kind of show the emotion of the piece and kind of stir the emotions of the listener. And then the balance and order of the Greek architecture was a major influence on the classical era, where they had actual formal structures come about that were very balanced and very ordered all the way throughout. So that kind of concludes what I have. Do you all have anything for me, like questions or anything like that? Or all right.
I'm sure you agree with me, that was a treat and a nice way of getting to the last day of the symposium, music and architecture. And if you have any questions, prepare them, because I have a couple, and I'll start because I have the mic. I'm a structural engineer myself, and into music as well. So I see some terminology that's kind of overlapping, like structure, form, construction. Even if you look into a sheet of music, and you look to the Baroque or Bach or Mozart or Beethoven, you find a certain structure in it. I mean, like an architecture in it. How would you elaborate on this?
I think without form, without the structure of music, it's hard to really define what music would be now. You hear structure in music even right now. If you turn to pop radio, there's some sort of structure going on.
Okay.
The music that was almost formless was the Gregorian chant. There was still some sort of structure to it, but not as much as what we see now. And we're using the same terminology because it's the same ideas. We want to have some sort of foundation to lay the music upon in order for it to be constructed and for it to flow in a way that we can understand. And I think our brains kind of interpret that formal structure very easily. We hear the chorus, verse in pop music. We see the forms here with the classical era. It's easy for us to hear that structure as it is for us easy to see the structure of the architecture and how it's balanced and how it's ordered. So.
Right. Any other questions? If you don't have, I have another question. In the Baroque time, it was kind of a culture period era when you have the hair style, the dress, the architecture in the buildings and in the music and in the writing style, the words and so forth. And contrast this to the time when architectural engineers started to mix straight lines and go away from curvy, more elaborate, ornamented thing. Just say the word. Give me the bottom line. It's the culture of things.
That actually kind of happened around the transition from the Baroque to the Classical era. The Baroque era was really known musically for having, we would see pieces of music from Corelli, violin suites that he had composed, where it would be like just simple notes. It would be a whole note, couple half notes, something that's very, if you look at it, it's like a sixth grader could play this. But you listen to them play it, and they do all this ornamentation, all this decoration upon the music. Well, it got to the point where it was so difficult for the amateur musicians to perform those things, and composers were starting to get music published because we have the printing press coming. I think it was 1501 when the printing press came about, but it was later than that, almost 1600s, where we had a printing press for music dedicated to it. Um, so we started to see more publications of music, so composers would make money off of it. They had to write it out all out, simplify it a little bit, take away some of that decoration, take away some of the ornamentation, so that the amateur musicians would go out and buy the music. So, and you saw a lot of that with, it became hard to publish the ornamented works, the ornamented books. It became simpler to publish and more expedient to publish the things that weren't quite as decorated. And so I think along with that, technology coming through, making it simpler and trying to mass produce things, you saw the elimination of the ornaments, the ornamentation and things like that, so the decoration.
Other questions? Yes.
I don't I don't know if there's a question, but I have comment. I enjoyed this very much, and I wanted to point out, at least to the audience, that you just had a 1 year's course in form and analysis, and because the musician
Very little of it.
well, but the true form and analysis would have spread that lecture out over a year's time, in order to look at so many of the different forms in this. But I love the way you've tied this to the Greek architecture, and I thought you were going to go, and I read the blurb here, and so on my arrival I was thinking that you would go from a very simple music and compare that to the Ionic column, or go on to the Doric and a little bit of interplay, and then we would get to Baroque and Rococo through the Corinthian architectural modes and those types of things. But one doesn't have to, because you have described it and diagrammed it for us very well there. I want to link some of your comments back to one of the evening sessions last week when Dr. Marquardt was looking at the Greek architecture and showing that as you can see, as we approach the Acropolis here, and these buildings are gone at this point, but there was, before you reach the top of the mountain, there was a place where architecturally they took you into a tunnel, clearly with measured columns and everything symmetrical, etc. But they took you into a darker place so that we could focus on the exuberance of what was at the top of the mountain, and in color and all these types of things. But that's very similar to what we're showing here in terms of let's manipulate the listener or the observer by taking them somewhere that they didn't know that you on purpose were taking them there. And then all of a sudden, it's all the more rich when you get to the other side. And some of the movements that you were in the courtly dances and those types of things were to give the ear a rest, and to give the eye, or to give your body a rest. If you're dancing through all these things, some are slower, you move less, and then others are faster. So I enjoyed this very much. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a physician and a historian, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm sure you've been taking notes, and maybe you have some questions, so I give you this opportunity if you have something. If you don't have now, I have a question, so prepare your question. Why do we connect these musics, forms and so forth, to the Greeks? Why not to the ancient Egypt? Why not to cathedrals in Europe? Why not to the Inca or whatever?
The easiest answer for that would be, that's what they said. That's what they were looking to. That's what, when you talk to the historians or you talk to the composers, if they had like an interview of some of the stuff they said, that's where they were being drawn to.
They said that, okay.
Yeah, that's where they were going to. There was some writings of Egypt, and there were some writings of other things, but the crucial part was they liked the structural balance. Every column was the same. Every angle was the same. There was this idea of order in everything, and that you didn't see that quite as much in the cathedrals like Notre Dame. There's a lot of the trusses are a little bit more angular than some other parts are, and so it isn't necessarily as balanced, as fully ordered as the structures you would see with the ancient Greeks.
So it's these musicians spoke or wrote about this, not that we think that they did that.
The composers and music historians of that time were going back to that.
Excellent. Yes. Lots of questions, but not now. Excellent. Well, there's something here for Dr. Francis.
Yes, we want to thank Dr. Francis for giving us our lesson this morning, and we would give him a commemorative certificate for your portfolio.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.